Interesting how both of these clips that we have looked at today have two characters who are a little bit older, who are looking back on their life experience and seeking to relate to someone who is younger than them, and in some ways asking for a second chance. What's interesting is how different both characters take that second chance. The young woman says to Noah, because that's what that video clip is from, Noah, let's do it right this time. Do it right this time. You have an opportunity, no matter where you are in life, to do it right this time. The son in the movie, I Can Only Imagine, just isn't at the place where he can forgive his dad just yet. I don't know about you, but I can relate to both characters. I can relate to both characters because there have been times in my life when I know that I have needed a second chance from someone else. And sometimes I've been granted that gift of a second chance, and other times I have not. Today we are reminded of the power of a second chance and a man whose entire ministry, his entire life, was based on ensuring that women in this community knew the power of a second chance. Women who had been incarcerated. That man's name was Bishop John P. Crane. And he not only believed, but lived in the power of a God of second chances. And in 1978, he gave his name to the Crane House. And the Crane House opened, and since then, it has been a safe place that offers women a second chance with rehabilitation, family therapy, substance abuse counseling, vocational programming. It's a safe place where they can get through very difficult relationships, most often abusive. It's a place where women who have been incarcerated can gather with their preschool children and be reminded that this is a world that provides second chances. We sometimes forget that, don't we? On a daily basis, our news is just filled with different life experiences that remind us that this is a challenging world that we live in. A very challenging world that we live in. And we forget that God is a God of second chances. You know, throughout the Bible, there are people who are granted some amazing second chances. I mean, amazing second chances. You saw Noah there. Noah, the destruction of all humanity, Noah was able to make it through there, and Noah was given the second chance and the promise of God that humanity would never be taken away like that again. Moses, do you know that prior to his great experience of helping the Israelites into the promised land, Moses murdered a man. Yet God granted him a second chance. David, remember the guy who committed a little adultery with a gal named Bathsheba? A guy who thought his sweetheart was so great, he decided to send her husband to the front line where he was killed in action. David was king. David had a special relationship with God. Rahab's in the Old Testament, and she as well was a prostitute who then was able to help the Israelites overthrow Jericho and to take the city. In the New Testament, she became the mother actually of kings. And in the New Testament, she is revered as one who was righteous. In the New Testament, I mean, look at Peter. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, says, I don't know him. And what happens? He becomes the father of the church. Perhaps one of my favorite New Testament characters would be Matthew. Matthew, we know him as one of the disciples and the author of the Gospel of Matthew. But for me, that is by far one of the most remarkable stories of second chances because Matthew did not start as a disciple. Matthew was a tax collector. He was Jewish and he worked for the Romans. He would go out and work out a deal with the Romans. It's almost like it was like franchising. Like he had a tax collecting franchise, and all he had to do was promise to get Rome a certain amount of money, and then he would turn that money over to Rome. But the government really didn't care how much he took from people. So he had worked out all kinds of deals. And on the sweat, toil, and blood and sweat and tears of his fellow Jews, he really made a killing as far as money went. He was a man who loved money so much that he didn't care that he didn't have a relationship, and he also didn't really work towards anything other than ensuring he had a lot of money. Matthew loved money so much, he didn't care about people. Or at least it didn't look like he cared. It didn't look like he cared, and that was until he encountered Jesus. When he encountered Jesus, and he saw indeed that there was something more powerful than money, his life was transformed. Somehow, Matthew understood when Jesus said, and this is in your bulletin, "My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life." Somewhere along the way, he was able to figure out that Jesus was more than money. And he somehow captured that and wanted that. Jesus said, "I'm not here just so you live an ordinary life. No, I have come here so that you can live a rich and satisfying life." Rich and satisfying. I love that. Matthew did go on to accept Jesus, to become one of his disciples, and to write a gospel that if you don't read the Bible much, I encourage you to go ahead and read Matthew's gospel. The beginning kind of starts a little bit like a phone book because it gives the lineage of Jesus. Just let that part go. Just go to where you are interested and start reading there. Matthew writes in a way that really shows the love of Jesus and Jesus' desire for us to have a rich and full life. Not only was there Matthew, but there was this guy, Paul, too. Paul, if you recall, actually early on worked against Jesus in his earthly ministry. And Paul was not only offered a second chance, but Paul took that second chance and created a whole culture that probably allows us to be where we are today. The church as it is today is probably because of the work of Paul. One who persecuted Christians, one who worked his life in such a way that it was really all about him. He was transformed, given a second chance through the love of Jesus, and he went in his letter to Romans, said this, and we know because God causes everything to work for good for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. Also this from Philippians, which isn't in your program, but I want you to think about writing it down, goes like this. God, who began a good work in you, is faithful to complete it. That's it. God, who began a good work in you, is faithful to complete it. Now, we all know how many challenges and difficulties we have in life, that indeed Philippians 1:6 is true, that God is a God of second chances. God started something good in you before you were born, and God is faithful to complete that good thing. God loves us, friends, and we are offered a rich, abundant life through Christ, and we are made in the goodness of God. All we have to do is seek to be faithful in the fullness of life, to forgive when we can forgive, to accept responsibility for our behavior, and then to work through until we can find the place of forgiveness. This past month, I don't know about you, but it changed me. Our recovery month changed me. People having the willingness to share their life stories and their life experiences and how God indeed gave them a second chance changed me. Not only the stories we had here, but if you get a chance, go to the Crane House website and you'll read the story of Nikki, one who recognizes that God is a God of second chances and how her life changed in the midst of her experience at Crane House. See, these are people who understand what it's like to live with whammies. to live with difficulties. And what's so interesting to me as I explore, as we've looked at people who have had addictions, those addictions often lead people to a place where they get even more whammies. Do you ever notice that? Somebody who ends up hitting bottom, then the bottom continues, and then it's like one thing piles on another. And it's almost like when you are piled upon with all that stuff, that you finally say, God, I give up. We heard that. We heard that with Lori's story, with Jim's story, with Christina's story, with Nikki's story. We heard an authenticity that comes with hitting rock bottom and realizing that the only thing that you can be truly dependent upon is God. Drugs can't fix it. Alcohol can't fix it. It's only a relationship with God that will indeed give you a rich, full life. I'm not the only minister who has had this kind of experience. The author Philip Yancey once had an experience where he had a young man who was struggling with an addiction and was able to, he hit rock bottom and he came back and became totally committed to the 12-step process. In fact, so committed to AA that he left the church. Yancey could see how this young man was working in the community and working in the world, and he thought to himself, why is it that this young man has left the church? Why, after he was moved to this incredible change, did this young man decide that church attendance was no longer necessary? Phil took the young man out for coffee, and when he asked him why, the young man said this. As soon as I find it in my notes. Okay, he said this. Mainly, I'm trying to survive, and AA helps me in the struggle far better than my church ever did. Yancey further explored, saying, name one thing that's missing in the church here that AA provides to you. The kid stared blankly in his coffee, watching it go cold, and he finally looked up and he whispered one answer: dependency. He explained, most church people give off a self-satisfied air of superiority. I don't sense them consciously leaning on God or leaning on each other. Maybe God is calling us alcoholics to teach the saints what it means to be dependent upon Him and on His community on earth. Ouch. This young man is finding something rich and full in the fullness of God in a 12-step program, but when he comes to church, he feels like it's not real. Perhaps something is missing for the church today that we need to be mindful of. Perhaps what we need to be mindful of today is indeed God works through tough circumstances and gives us second chances. And that we too need to recognize that we need a second chance and we ain't all that. That we need each other and we ain't all that. Now, I'm not suggesting here that, like Moses, you go out and murder somebody, or I'm not suggesting here that you take one of those vices that you enjoy, the one drink a night, and turn it into a life-changing experience and become dependent on it. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is just simply realizing that we need the God of second chances no matter where you are in life. What I'm suggesting is holding it all together is not necessarily what means success in this world. Sometimes we have to be willing to be seen in a way that perhaps we don't have it all together. Perhaps we need to come into this place and say, I had a pretty lousy week, and I need your help. Perhaps we need to find a way to say, we've had a rough week this week, and then share the story of your family. Then and only then can you truly be the church that Paul has called into action, the church of second chances. I believe that God wants to work through the likes of you and me, not with the money we have, not with the wealth we have, not with having it all together, but by admitting we don't. That's what makes relationships real. The truth about life is indeed, and Mary reminded me today, is control is an illusion. We can be doing the right thing and experience a whammy just like that. That's why, in part, you are here today. You're here today because you realize that you need a God who loves you beyond your understanding. You realize that this conditional world brings with it joys and challenges, gains and losses. Friends, we don't know what tomorrow will bring, but today the God of second chances is giving you an opportunity to take down holding it all together, to take down whatever it is that you're holding in your arms, and be mindful of what you are holding in your heart. This week, a remarkable thing happened. In fact, on Friday, a remarkable thing happened in court. Botham Jean was a young accountant who, after a long day, came home and was sitting on his couch eating a bowl of ice cream when Dallas police officer Amy Geiger mistakenly entered his apartment instead of her own and shot him fatally. The trial completed this week. There was an opportunity for victim statements. Botham's 18-year-old brother, Brant, took the stand. And well, here's what happened.